Hi everyone! Today's sew-along is for the Catalina dress by Blank Slate Patterns. I'll leave the link below so you can grab it and sew it along with me today. This pattern offers a few views, different length options, as well as a sleeveless or capped sleeve option. For the bodice, you can choose to add button plackets. I chose to create the button placket aesthetic, but make it a little bit easier by drafting my own faux button placket and sewing it directly onto the front bodice. I'll show you that process with today's construction. Subscribe for more sew-alongs and let's get started with the Catalina dress. You will need one front bodice cut on the fold, one back bodice cut on the fold, 2 pockets mirrored, 2 pocket linings mirrored, one faux placket measuring the length of the middle of your center front bodice. I chose to make mine 2 inches wide and 11 1/4 inches long. I also cut a piece of interfacing that I'm going to fuse right in the middle of my placket. It's the same length, but 1 inch wide. One front skirt and one back skirt cut on the fold. The only difference between front and back is the pocket. 1.5 yards of 1/2 inch single fold bias tape, 1/2 inch elastic. Measurements for the elastic for each size are included in the pattern, and 4 to 6 buttons. I'm going to start by preparing my faux button placket. I'm going to take it to my ironing board, fuse my interfacing, and then fold each long raw edge toward the center to the wrong side by 1/4 inch. Now that my placket is interfaced and ironed, I'm going to attach it to my front bodice. With the wrong side of my placket facing the right side of my bodice, I'm going to center the placket and pin. Now that it's pinned, I'm going to take it to my machine and edge stitch close to each side of the placket to secure it. Now place your front and back pieces right sides together and pin your shoulder and side seams. Sew your shoulder and side seams with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I've sewn my shoulders and edges, and I also went ahead and serged each seam for a clean finish. Now I'm ready to attach my neckline and arm bindings. Grab your bias tape, and from the point where you'll be starting, fold the short edge over about 1/4 inch so that you start with a nice clean finish. Right sides together, finding the center back, place that folded edge of bias tape right at the center and pin. Continue pinning your bias tape to the neck edge all the way around. Once you've pinned the bias tape all around the neckline and you're back at the beginning, allow the bias tape to overlap your starting point by about 1/2 inch, pin, and snip off the excess. Now we're going to take it to our machine and sew the binding to the neckline. We will be sewing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, allowing the needle to sew right in this crease that's built into the single fold bias tape. Now that our bias tape is sewn to the right side of the fabric, we're going to take it to our ironing board, flipping the entire strip of bias tape to the inside of the garment for a clean finish. Press that entire folded edge really well. Now that my bias tape is pressed to the inside of the garment, I'm ready to edge stitch the bottom folded edge of the bias tape all around the inside edge of the neckline, making sure that the raw edge of my bias tape is tucked under for a nice clean finish. Pin or clip all around the edges to make sure you maintain that nice crisp folded edge. Now our neckline is finished and it's time to bind the armholes. Go ahead and bind each armhole following the same exact steps we used for the neckline. Now grab your skirt front and your 2 pocket lining pieces. Place the pocket linings right sides together with your skirt front, along those curved edges, and pin. Stitch your curved seams with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and serge. Now that my pockets are sewn and serged to the front of my skirt, I'm going to flip them over to the inside of the garment. Now give those pockets a good press, and if you want, you can top stitch these pockets down with about an 1/8 inch seam allowance. Now I'm going to turn my skirt over to the wrong side. I'm going to grab my 2 pocket pieces and place them right sides together with each pocket lining. Match your curved edges and pin these 2 pocket layers together. Now take it to your machine, sew your pocket pieces together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and then serge. Now that my pockets are sewn together and serged, I'm going to take it back to my machine and baste these top edges of the pocket where they meet the skirt and the side edges. So baste them to the skirt at the sides of the pocket and the tops of the pockets so we can finish construction. Now let's sew our front and back skirt pieces together at the side seams. Place your front and back skirt pieces right sides together and pin or clip both side seams. Sew both of your side seams with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and serge. My side seams are sewn and serged, and I'm ready to prepare the top of my skirt so I can attach it to the bodice. We're going to do a little bit of basting. We will be basting the front of the skirt and the back of the skirt separately. For the back of the skirt, I'm going to leave tails at the beginning and at the end, stitching with a 5mm stitch length. I'm going to be doing 2 rows. 1 row with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to start again with new tails on both sides with a 3/4 inch seam allowance. And then for the front of the skirt, because I want the pocket portions of my skirt to lay nice and flat, I'm only going to be basting starting from the interior side of one pocket all the way to the other interior of the other pocket. And I'm going to do this basting twice as well. One basting set a 1/4 inch away and the other 3/4 inch away. Now let's start attaching the bodice to the skirt. We're going to place the bodice inside of the skirt so that they are wrong sides together. So my skirt is here right side out, and I'm going to grab my bodice and turn it wrong side out and place it inside my skirt, matching side seams, center fronts, and center backs. For the front of the skirt, I'm going to go ahead and pin the entire top of the skirt as far as the pocket because I don't want that portion to be gathered. Do this for both sides. Now we can pull our basting stitches and begin to gather. Once it's gathered and the bodice fits perfectly with the skirt portion, go ahead and pin. Do this all around the skirt for the front and the back. Now that it's gathered and pinned, take it to your sewing machine and stitch all around the top of the skirt with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now that I've finished stitching that seam, I'm going to pull my bodice out and turn it over the skirt so that they're now facing right sides together. I'm going to take it to my ironing board and give this seam a really good press. I've given it a good press. Now I'm going to clip all the way around this waistline. And now I'm going to take it back to my machine and stitch the waistline once again with a 3/4 inch seam allowance. Now I've finished sewing it at 3/4 inch all the way around, and I'm going to reach in and pull my bodice out once again. And with this seam that we've created on the inside, up toward the bodice, we're going to top stitch this seam all around the upper edge, all around the waistline. This will create our casing. Edge stitch this seam to your bodice all the way around the waistline. I've gone ahead and pinned the seam to the bodice so everything stays aligned while I sew, and I've put a clip here on the seam at the center back to remind myself to leave a 2-inch gap in my stitching here so I can insert my elastic. Grab your elastic, attach a safety pin to the end, and through the gap in stitching we left in the back of our skirt, Draw your elastic through the entire waistline. And when you're back at the beginning, take out your safety pin, slightly overlap the edges of your elastic, and sew over a few times with a zigzag stitch. And to finish the casing, take it back to your machine and continue edge stitching that casing to the front bodice to close that gap. Now I'm going to attach my buttons. With chalk and a ruler, I made markings on my front bodice where I want my buttons to go. I spaced them 2 inches apart, and with a needle and thread, I'll sew them on. Now the very last thing before we're completely done with our dress is to hem the bottom. For the hem, take it to your ironing board, press it up once 1/2 inch, then again 3/4 inch, and stitch along that inner fold all the way around the bottom of your skirt. And then you're done. Thank you for watching this sew along. Make sure you check out my other videos for more sewing inspiration for your wardrobe. I look forward to seeing you in the next sew along.